In the distant dark age of the 1970s, the human race was on its knees. The fashion was terrible and the buildings were ugly, but one of the 1970s biggest victims was the genre of science fiction. Even though its savior was on the horizon, the state before his arrival was dire. This is terrible 70s sci-fi madness. Do you ever have these moments where you see references to something float around the pop culture landscape and go, hey, that looks promising, I want to check that out, only to then walk away from it just feeling really mixed about it? That is Soylent Green.
New York City, 50 years from today. Nothing runs, nothing works.
The weird 70s dystopian movie about a near-lethally polluted and overpopulated Earth where people get turned into weird plasticky looking food products.
Soylent Green.
Soylent Green is probably the best example of that old movie that has made its way through the pop culture meat grinder. Since its release in 1973, it has become basically shorthand for hokey sci-fi predictions of the future, and even parodies thereof, being referenced in everything from Deus Ex to Futurama.
Soylent Green.
Soylent Cola.
Soylent Orange.
Soylent Green.
Soylent Coleslaw.
And basically any future episode of Old Simpsons.
One Soylent Green, hold the butter.
Soylent Green.
But Soylent Green, outside of its pop culture status, is a bit of an oddball of an entity though.
Simonson, board of directors of the Soylent Corporation, murdered because he discovered the secret of Soylent Green.
Soylent Green.
The best way I can surmise the movie is that it's about a barely present US government and big corporations using already dead people in the future year of now to somehow produce green plastic crackers to feed a bunch of people in beige rags. In a world so polluted that nature is almost dead, and simple everyday food items have disappeared from the average citizen's table, like my dad did out of my life. But let me begin from the start. In the mid-20th century, fears began growing about the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. Perhaps the least relevant today is the fear of unsustainable population growth and dwindling resources.
Overpopulation, so long predicted, has stolen upon us. It's getting worse week by week.
In the 1960s, a new kind of fear began to spread across America.
The U.S. could be busting out at the seams by the end of the century.
If we do not, by humane means, limit our numbers, then numbers are going to be limited by more famines and shortages and consequent social conflict.
Which is largely mitigated today by a huge variety of factors like more women in the workforce, better education resulting in less poverty and lower rates of child conceptions, more widespread use of contraceptives, changes in societal expectation, population ceilings, government interventions in places like China, creating their own host of issues, and human beings as a whole being more complicated than just creatures that do nothing but consume and fuck all day. But my cynicisms aside, this perhaps somewhat misguided fear brought us to the book this movie is based on. Make Room by Harry Harrison. Written in 1966, it follows 30-year-old police detective Andy Rush, who lives in a half-room, make room, in the overpopulated city of New York at the tail end of 1999, with a population of 36 million. He shares that space with Saul, a strong-willed retired Jewish engineer. Andy's tasked to investigate the murder of racketeer Big Mike O'Brien, who was accidentally murdered by Billy Chung, a young Asian American who broke into his apartment because it has AC and running water, both rare commodities in this barren future year of ours, with another rare commodity being average foods like beef, having long since been supplanted by substitutes made out of soy and lentils. Oh, I get it. The way I would describe Make Room starring Tommy Wiseau is your typical gritty 1960s through 80s take on NYC by way of Kowloon Walled City or Judge Dredd. A proto-cyberpunk book that is actually a lot more conceptually interesting than Soylent Green, in the shadow of which it unfortunately resides.
Like, you have in big letters Soylent Green, and then in really small letters it says make room. Like it's promoting the movie more than the actual book.
The movie rights for the book were acquired from Harrison by MGM, with execs basically saying that the premise of overpopulation, climate and environmental catastrophes were too abstract and boring to alone make a movie around. You know, because this was the 70s before anyone actually had to deal with two out of those three things. That's why they threw out most of the plot, reinvented Soylent into the weird cannibal cracker company, removed the Asian, added women being abused for no reason and without resolution, and steered the whole movie towards that cracker thing. Harrison thought that direction was dumb, and coined the phrase idiotic cannibal cracker due to his dissatisfaction with what they chose to make the focal point of the movie, which is a sentiment I have to agree with.
What is the secret of Soylent Green?
Soylent Green was made to be a semi-eco thriller about what is now a non-mystery first.
What is the secret of Soylent Green?
With the journey of how we get there and what we do after coming across as an afterthought.
What is the secret of Soylent Green?
The movie itself is only an hour and 30 minutes, yet it feels like it didn't know what to really do with itself during that time. It starts off with NYPD officer Frank Thorne being tasked to investigate the murder of William Simonson.
They told me to say that they were sorry, but that you had become unreliable.
They're right.
There he comes in contact with Simonson's bodyguard and concubine, who are sadly not the same person, even though that would be really sexy. One who's paid off by Soylent, and the other one who was the first gamer girl ever brought to film. That oversized sperm-looking thing, by the way, is also the first video game to ever appear in a movie, no joke. Charlton Heston steals a bunch of Simonson's shit and fucks his furniture lady, briefly turning the movie into a porn parody of itself, a hallmark of the weird 70s movie. Then he brings back the oceanographic reports from Simonson's office back to his apartment for Sol, rewritten to be a former professor and current police analyst, to look over. He basically just takes them because it's convenient for the plot.
They were the only reference books he had. You like them? Love them.
Frank then has a squabble with the black police chief in the Oompa Loompa costume about the case and leaves. Sol brings the reports to the Supreme Exchange, basically a library filled with other police analysts, who discover that the high-energy plankton,
Maximum overdrive!
which is what Soylent claims Soylent Green is made out of,
The miracle food of high-energy plankton.
is actually dying alongside all other ocean life. And then everything kind of sort of ends. Sol kills himself to escape this wretched future he didn't help to prevent. His body gets taken to the facility. Charlton Heston gets there too. Then he flees, goes to a church he was at earlier, gets slightly wounded by one of Soylent's assassins, then boom, roll credits. Oh, and he also screams that catchphrase. Did I mention the catchphrase?
Soylent Green is people! We gotta stop them somehow!
Yeah, great movie, huh? We gotta stop the big corporation through something, somehow. Ugh. If I had to sum up what I dispassionately hate about Soylent Green, it would be that it wants you to care about its world, society, and environment, but spends most of its time in rooms with two people talking.
Who bought you?
You're bought as soon as they pay you a salary.
Yeah, who's they?
High and hot, and they want this case closed permanently. Their way. Now you sign this.
You sign it!
I can't tell you what scale this story really operates on as a result. Does it want to be a small-scale story about a character getting himself into a bad situation? Or does it want to be about the world dying and big corporations? I can't tell you. And the movie doesn't know either. All I know is that it can't show you any of these big, interesting things. It pretends to take place in a world where nothing works. But most of what we see is so mundane and 70s. That it doesn't really bring that across. Instead, they just opt to constantly tell, don't show us how bad this world is, and it just doesn't bite.
Do you know how many books were published in this country once upon a time? When there was paper and power and presses that worked and...
That's Rice.
Yeah, I've seen him before.
When you were young, people were better. Oh, nuts. People were always rotten. And the world was beautiful.
Subtlety. Same with the mystery they really want us to care about. In a more competently put together story, they would not have shown and spelled out how and why it was done right at the start, only revealed the details later on, alongside the reason behind the act, and then have the characters react to that alongside the audience, so we can actually have that aha moment. Or they would have shown us the hows and whys of the central premise.
Pretty fancy moves, Murphy. Bring in the LED.
You're gonna be a bad motherfucker.
Have the characters piece it together. Then act on it. And then try to tie a nice little bow around the whole thing.
Nice shooting, son. What's your name?
Murphy.
But Soylent Green, as established, isn't written smartly. I wouldn't even say that it's well written at all. What it does have going for it is that it has a good director and actors. In the original book, you have Saul joining a protest against the repeal of a population control law, getting shot, and dying of the consequences, which is beautifully complex. In the movie, he just offs himself after he finds out the world's fucked. That, despite its reductive nature, still somehow manages to be the emotional high of the movie, largely thanks to its direction and acting. Okay, so I wanted to show you that scene, but for some reason Warner Brothers, who I guess owns the copyright now, blocked the video worldwide, so yeah, just trust me on this one. Fuck Warner Brothers.
I love you so.
But then the movie just goes on for another 20 minutes, with the central character dynamic shattered and nobody really achieving anything. I like the idea of that whole people produce garbage and consume so much that in the end they get consumed and treated like garbage angle. That idea has a delightfully macabre, Boschian vibe to it, but it's done in this very plump, very unsatisfying way. Scenes like the market scene where people crowd the place and complain about not getting enough for what they paid for are a good start of moving this idea more to the foreground.
I stood in line the whole lousy day, and they gave me a quarter of a kilo! Do you believe that? Fuck! Let me go!
There's one clever scene in a park where there's a tent with trees in it because they can't grow in the environment outside. But not only are scenes like that in the minority, showing off this world also isn't their focus. The conspiracy about Soylent and Simonson is, and who gives a damn?
I'm to inform you that the board is determined to resolve the Simonson investigation immediately, sir.
But it was resolved.
Yes, sir, but the police officer involved refuses to close the case.
Furthermore, the actual turning dead people into food part, by modern standards, is also a bit of a letdown. It's not really presented in a very clever way or a way that goes under your skin either. Just body bags and vats and that conveyor belt with crackers. That's all they show. And while watching this, I asked myself, that's the big thing the studio wanted to make the make or break point of the movie? Really? On paper, I like its attempt at doing an environmentalist anti-corporate message, even though what it's saying is irrelevant and has nothing to do with actual environmental and social issues facing us right now.
It's somewhat ironic that what Paul Ehrlich saw as a horrible, hellish vision of the future is what turned the population bomb upside down.
I like the interactions between Charlton Heston and Edward G. Robinson, who sadly died during the production of this film. They have good chemistry and the movie's character-focused scenes are well directed, and overall the idea and concept, however primitively presented, is still resonating. That's why I wanted to talk about this movie. It's one whose concept has stayed with me since my early teens when I first heard about it, and yet I think it's a movie that wasn't ready for its own material yet. But it did at least provide that primordial soup for movies like Blade Runner, Escape from New York, Mad Max, Judge Dredd, and even RoboCop to step out of. Maybe that's why pop culture likes to reference it. It was one of the first bumbling steps movies took towards the grittier forms of sci-fi, and that's something to celebrate at least. I would love for this to be either remade or for Make Room to be readapted. But in the meantime, I want all of you nerds who like this movie to shut the fuck up and reference the stuff instead. That social commentary killer food movie is way more fun. If you've never heard of it, consider yourself lucky, put it on and chase it with The Thing. Just so if somebody asks what you did with your day, you can say you've seen The Stuff and The Thing. That's surely gonna make for an interesting conversation.
Enough is never enough. Enough is never enough of the stuff.
The stuff. I imagine it tastes like Fluffernutter. I want some.